The heft of Lower East Side gangster Irving Wexler, also known as Waxy Gordon, and Detroit mobster Max Greenberg, Rothstein put up the initial $175,000 to establish the first bootlegging operations of the Prohibition era, servicing the Midwest and the East Coast with British whiskey transported across the Atlantic. Rum-running ships owned by Rothstein and his partners would smuggle the British whiskey from Long Island Sound into the U.S. Rothstein's British contacts included Winston Churchill, who at the time headed the Royal Commission in charge of liquor. In 1921, Rothstein also opened up a British pipeline for smuggling heroin into the United States via his business agent in China, Jacob Katzenberg. Katzenberg hooked up with the British Opium Cartel, then headed by Lord Keswick of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation and the Jardine and Matheson Trading Company, and arranged the transit of the illegal drugs through Marseille into New York City. The route, later known as the French Connection, would remain the primary pipeline of heroin into America up through the 1960s. The period of Prohibition, folks, marks the syndication of organized crime. It also marks the emergence of illegal money as a major source of investment capital in so-called legitimate business. As the proceeds of the billions of dollars in illegal whiskey and dope sales were funneled into such lucrative straight investments as the Hollywood, motion picture, and music industries, the Nevada gambling casinos. Nevada conveniently legalized casino gambling just as Prohibition was coming to an end, and post-Prohibition legal alcohol distilleries, the ADL, was on hand to directly reap the benefits. In 1929, ladies and gentlemen, one of Meyer Lansky's New York City crime lieutenants, Frank Erickson, founded the Sterling National Bank. Erickson was a specialist in money laundering. After Lansky replaced Arnold Rothstein, where he was assassinated in 1926, as the chairman of the board of the National Crime Syndicate, Erickson had been put in charge of the nationwide bookkeeping operations. Erickson handled Lansky's hidden interests in gambling casinos, racetracks, and other businesses around the country. Sterling National Bank served as the mob's factor bank in the New York City Garment Center, doling out high-interest short-term loans to thousands of small clothing manufacturers to purchase their raw materials. The loans were collateralized by the garment firm's accounts receivable. On paper, it was a benign, barely legal form of loan sharking. The victims were Jews. In practice, it was the syndicate's foot in the door for taking over the entire garment industry through violence and intimidation. Again, the victims were Jews. Erickson's relationship with Lansky gave Sterling virtually unchallenged control over the garment center. In 1934, Theodore H. Silbert went to work for Sterling National Bank. Within a decade of his arrival, Silbert was the bank's chairman, president, and CEO, posts he would retain up until his death in early 1992. You see, Silbert was the ADL's man on the scene. He would serve as the ADL's national commissioner, treasurer, and chief fundraiser. The ADL established its bank account at Sterling National, and according to IRS records, invested in bank stock. The only other outside investment into which the ADL would ever put its own money would be the American Bank and Trust Company, another New York City bank, which listed ADL National Commissioner and B'nai B'rith International President Philip Klutznick as a director. ABT would go under when shady Mossad financier David Gravier made off with all the bank's deposits and then ostensibly died in a mysterious airplane crash over Mexico. Gravier's so-called death was so suspect that New York State listed him as a co-conspirator in the ABT bank fraud investigation for years. For you see, they didn't then and they don't believe now that he really died in that plane crash. Although Silbert's emergence as the leading figure at Sterling National was part of a campaign to cleanse the bank's public image by replacing a known gangster with a philanthropist and civic-minded banker, Sterling continued to be entangled in shady financial dealings, sometimes leading to high-visibility civil suits. The most explosive of these scandals hit in January 1982, when the Italian government filed suit in the United States District Court in New York City against Sterling, charging it with constructive trust conspiracy to defraud, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The case, ladies and gentlemen, revolved around Italian banker Michele Sindona's looting of $27 million from the Banca Privata in 1973 to 74. The theft had repercussions across the Atlantic as well. The Franklin National Bank on Long Island, New York, went bust as the result of Sindona's involvement. Sterling National Bank was one of the laundromats through which Sindona washed the stolen cash. Folks, tonight's program is based upon a report by the Executive Intelligence Review, a special report by the editors of the Executive Intelligence Review. This report was first published in 1992, entitled The Ugly Truth About the ADL. It has taken CAGI this long to duplicate the research and verify that every single fact in here is absolutely 100% correct and true. The fact that none of the people, nor the ADL, has ever sued the Executive Intelligence Review over this information further substantiates the value and the truthfulness of this report. This is not an anti-Semitic report. It is an anti-ADL, anti-secret society, B'nai B'rith, controlled by the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, a racist organization promoting the concept of the British Israelism concept that the Anglo-Aryan race is superior to all others. Indeed, has a special covenant with God and all this other baloney. And folks, it is baloney. Someday we'll all wake up to that fact. Not surprisingly, Sindona would later be exposed as a pivotal figure in the Propaganda 2 Freemasonic Lodge, a secret Italian branch of the Scottish Rite with strong ties to the Mafia. Its antecedent, the 19th century Propaganda 1 Lodge, had been founded by Giuseppe Mazzini, the founder of the Sicilian Mafia, as a branch of the European Illuminati, a leading member of the First Communist International and an agent of Britain's Lord Palmerston, the Grand Master of the Scottish Rite. Giuseppe Mazzini was in close communication with the Confederate General Albert Pike, who was the head of the Illuminati in the United States. Some things, folks, just never, ever change. The ADL's shady links to Sterling National Bank went beyond Theodore Silbert. Another longtime director of the bank, an ADL man, Maxwell Robb, was a business partner of Meyer Lansky in a company called the International Airport Hotel Corporation. The vice chairman of the powerful New York State ADL, Robb weathered the public airing of his Lansky links and went on to be the United States ambassador to Italy during the Reagan administration. Talk about putting the fox in the henhouse. Arnold Burns was another ADL asset on the board of Sterling. Burns' law firm, Burns and Summit, got caught up in a tax evasion scheme in the early 1980s that almost landed both partners in jail. Under a loophole in the federal tax codes written into law thanks to the Zionist lobby in the United States Congress, American investors in Israel research and development firms could claim their investments as tax write-offs, but nobody else could, investing in the same type of business in other countries and in the United States. Arnold Burns set up a string of tax shelters in the Bahamas, ostensibly to fund these Israeli research and development projects. However, the money, minus a hefty fee to Burns and Summit, never, ever reached Israel. It was laundered right back into the United States where it could be used by its own owners tax-free. And when the scheme became the subject of a federal grand jury in New York, Burns pointed a finger at some of his cohorts and walked away, completely unscathed. A few months later, Arnold Burns was named Deputy Attorney General of the United States, a post he held throughout most of the Reagan era, Deputy Attorney General of the United States of America. Burns's name had been placed before Ronald Reagan by John J. McCloy, a powerhouse in the New York City white Anglo-Saxon Protestant establishment, a leading Anglophile British Israelist, ex-head of the Central Intelligence Agency, and the former chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank. Nor is Sterling National Bank the only ADL bank implicated in the dope trade and organized crime. Leonard Abbott of Miami, Florida, is another honorary national chairman of the ADL. He's the chairman of City National Bank of Miami, one of many Florida banks caught laundering big-time drug money. A top aide to Abbott at City National, Alberto Duke, was jailed in the late 1980s for laundering dope dollars. Another senior bank official, Donald Beasley, was hired by Abbott on the basis of his former work for the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia, and if you read my book, you know all about Nugan Hand Bank and the Central Intelligence Agency and the laundering of drug money. Nugan Hand went bust in the mid-1980s when one of its founders, Frank Nugan, was found dead in his car, the victim of what police labeled a suicide, and the other partner, former Green Beret and CIA agent Michael Hand, a veteran of Delta Force, disappeared into thin air with $26 million in bank assets. Nugan Hand had been set up during the final days of the Vietnam War by ex-Central Intelligence Agency and Pentagon officers, including Ted Shackley, to launder black market profits into shady intelligence operations throughout Asia. In the 1985 Mo Dalitz Award dinner was a kind of coming-out party for the ADL's friends in the National Crime Syndicate. It was, ladies and gentlemen, by no means the first time the League publicly flaunted its deep ties to the gangster world. You see, in 1963, as part of an effort to vastly expand its fundraising reach, the ADL appointed Hollywood producer Dor Sherry as its national chairman. At the time, Sherry was the reigning superstar at the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studios. Among the Hollywood insiders, however, Sherry was known as a lifelong pal of syndicate higher-up Abner Longy Zwillman of New Jersey. Zwillman was one of the first of the Prohibition-era bootleggers and Lansky aides to get involved in the Hollywood motion picture industry, an original member of Murder Incorporated, and the head of the powerful Reinfeld bootlegging syndicate in New Jersey. Zwillman expanded into labor racketeering during the waning days of Prohibition. And by 1930, he had seized control over the Screen Operators Union up and down the East Coast and parlayed that into shares in some of the big Hollywood studios. And you don't think there's any mind control in America? At this time, Dor Sherry ran an amateur drama group at the YMHA in Newark, New Jersey. Childhood friend Zwillman sent Sherry out to the West Coast and installed him at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. When Zwillman got into trouble with the IRS in the late 1950s, some of his syndicate associates became convinced that he might betray some of the mob's most closely held financial secrets. And on February the 27th, 1959, he was found hanging from a pipe in the basement of his 20-room West Orange, New Jersey mansion. According to Federal Bureau of Investigation reports, Sherry attended the funeral. In the FBI memo citing Sherry's appearance at the Zwillman funeral, the Bureau delivered a kind of eulogy to the mobster, citing an article from the New York World Telegram. The FBI memo read, quote, "Nobody followed so successfully for so long the approved underworld formula for success, from rags to rackets to riches to respectability," end quote. And folks, if the rags to respectability formula were to be applied to organizations, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith would be first on the list of success stories. For the